Welcome to the Masculine Psychology Podcast, where we answer key questions in dating, relationships, success, and fulfillment, and explore the psychology of masculinity. Now, here's your host, world-renowned therapist and life coach, David Tian.
Welcome to the Masculine Psychology Podcast. I'm David Tian, your host. This episode is all about your emotions, emotional control, emotional skill, emotional mastery. I'm talking about control over emotions that you don't want to feel, as well as the emotions that you want to feel, that it will be in your control to feel more of the emotions that you want to feel and less of the emotions that you don't want to feel. And then to question whether there are even such things as good or bad emotions at all. Also, as part of emotional skill or emotional control is the question of repression or suppression. And when you suppress something long enough, it eventually becomes repressed. If you suppress your emotions long enough, it'll be harder and harder to actually even access those emotional states. And people who live with a lot of emotional repression, which is a lot of people who live according to discipline, willpower, the hustle and grind, and grin and bear it, a lot of achievers who live under that repressive energy have difficulty accessing the full rainbow of their emotions, the full range of their emotions, the full range of emotions available to them, and therefore the full range of their power, and the full range of their enjoyment of life, and the full richness of their lives, and instead living lives that are dull, monotone, dreary, and they will often feel exhausted and tired after repressing so much for so long. And if that's you, or if any of this resonates with you, then this is the episode for you. So, why are emotions so important? Well, it's because emotions are everything. It's common for achievers to be mostly oriented and focused on goals. And almost always, these goals are action-oriented. They're about getting the raise, or making a certain amount of money, or winning the game or the season, or winning the trophy or something along those lines. And they never stop to question why they're doing that in the first place. Why is this a worthy goal? Because a long time ago in their formative years, often in early childhood, in order to get or keep the attention, acceptance, approval, love of their caregivers, their parents mostly, they had to become a certain way. And many achievers are pleasers or rebels. Most of them are pleasers, and achievers are kind of a subset of the pleaser in order to get that acceptance and approval and attention of the ones that they craved it from the most and were actually dependent on in many ways for even just for life. They had to become a certain way, and that way was often, for my audience, achievers. And that was my MO, and maybe it's yours as well. And achievers, and all of those who aspire to be achievers, so you could aspire to be, like you could have decided, I'm going to be the achiever as your main coping strategy, and yet not be a very successful achiever, because maybe you didn't have the tools or the mentors or the right resources to show you how to achieve effectively. But maybe you did. Maybe your genes, your genetic background really helped as well. And maybe you did succeed. And maybe what that means is that you're not going to be able to ask these questions until an extra 10, 20 years, because your outward success numbs you, distracts you, pacifies you for that period of time until you finally realize you're tired, exhausted, and the whole thing is endless and meaningless. Now, if you fell flat in your face early on, you might have been able to come to that conclusion earlier, but then you wouldn't get all the success that you have. So those goals that I mentioned, financial, economic, athletics, whatever that goal is of success and achievement, we think that that's all there is, that emotions either get in the way of getting these goals, or sometimes they can help you get these goals. So that emotions and even therapy, and especially life coaching and self-help and that sort of thing, are used as tools in the service of achieving these outer goals, these external goals, these achievement-oriented goals of making more money, getting a better body, getting the girls for some of you guys, whatever it is. So unfortunately, achievers or aspiring achievers lose sight of the why behind their goals in the first place. And many achievers and aspiring achievers haven't ever or have difficulty asking the big why question of why would I be doing this at all? And for many people at the beginning of achieving goals, a lot of it has to do with certainty or security. So the most basic need that's being met by making money, by reaching a minimal financial goal, is the security that you'll get and the feeling of security and the feeling of certainty that you'd get from having enough to pay the bills, pay the rent and the electricity and so on. And just knowing that that's there so you're not living on the street. But even if you end up on the street, you get certainty if you discover that there's a place that will take you for the night. Now that's on the low end of things. And on the upper end, for anyone who's been an achiever for a while, you'll notice that your goalpost keeps changing, keeps moving. It is never enough because, well, you probably bought into this whole thing about growth, how you've got to keep growing. And the competition keeps moving with you, so you got to keep improving. And it can never be enough. And in fact, it never is enough for achievers. And that's why they get exhausted and can never really rest, because they're always beating themselves up to get to the next level, even when they don't really want to do the thing anymore, the activity that will take them there. Maybe they're burnt out or they've lost their zest for it. So at the upper end of these goals, it's not just for security anymore, though that still plays a big part in it, but it's also for significance, for this feeling of accomplishment. And these are all feelings. These are all emotions. The feeling that you are somebody, therefore you're significant, therefore you're worthy, therefore you're enough. And the feeling of accomplishment, even feeling flow when you're in flow doing the activity. These are feelings. There's a feeling of happiness and joy at the end of that, and hopefully during it. But no matter what your goals are, for the goals to get off the ground, for them to motivate you, even motivation, of course, is a feeling, right? To even have that activity get off the ground, for you to start it, it starts with emotion. And what it's aiming at is some emotion. Like when you're making money, you're not actually motivated to do it just to get little pieces of green paper or whatever color paper your money is. It's what you hope to be able to do with that money that you're hoping will give you certain feelings. Even just having the money, if it's just to have it, it's this feeling of security. Or it's a feeling of accomplishment because you've earned it in some way. And so it's not just the paper money. So if it was about earning that feeling of accomplishment, if you were just to get the paper or the trophy without actually earning it, you wouldn't get the feeling of earning it. So no matter how you cash it out, it ends up becoming about feelings all the way up and down the whole spectrum of human action and decisions. And in fact, there's a great term for this from philosophy. It's called Buridan's ass. And you like to use the word ass instead of donkey because it's easier to remember and it sticks in your memory. Buridan's ass. Buridan was a 14th century French philosopher, so it's named after him. But this point was made by Aristotle and many other philosophers before him. Buridan's ass. And this is the image. So the ass, the donkey, is at a crossroads. And the way it's usually played out is so he's at a fork in the road. And one road is water, and the other road is food. And he's equally thirsty and hungry. He's standing at the crossroads, and he's looking at his equal distance from the food and the water, and he's equally hungry and thirsty. And therefore, this Buridan's ass can't decide which way to go. Should I go for the water? Should I go for the food? And he's caught in indecision. And he stays in indecision because there's no motivating force to push him in one direction or the other that will top the other direction. They're equidistant and they're equally motivating because he's equally hungry and thirsty. And he just stands at the crossroads and then dies. And how this applies to emotions is that we, especially those of my generation, I'm Gen X, and I know many of you are millennials, and millennials, I think, generally speaking, it's considered to be born 1980 to 95. I was born in the 70s. So my generation especially bought into the sort of modernist myth that rationality was everything and was the most important thing, that emotions merely cloud rationality. So the belief that we bought into, for those of us born in the 70s and earlier, is that if you can just get clear of your emotions, then you'll be able to make perfectly rational decisions, and then you will finally find happiness, joy, and peace. And of course, that's bullshit. And maybe you don't realize this yet, but like I'm showing you, all the way up and down, it's all about emotion. To get yourself out of Buridan's paradox, or to get yourself out of that stuck place, you have to start from wanting something. It all starts from emotion. There's a great illustration of this in Star Trek. Now, I might be dating myself again. I'm Gen X, but it's a great illustration. I haven't found anything better. The first generation had Spock, who was this ultra-rational, very physically powerful soldier. And he comes from a race of people, Vulcans, who repress their emotions and do so in an extreme way so that they can be ultra-rational and in control of all of their cognitive and physical faculties at a much higher level than the emotional humans, represented by Kirk. And that was Spock. He was the sort of ideal. And he was also a foil to the main character of Kirk. In the third series or version of Star Trek, Star Trek The Next Generation, starring Patrick Stewart, in that series, I've seen all 7 seasons multiple times, Spock was replaced by Commander Data, who was this android who beats Spock in all of those things that Spock takes pride in, or in the Vulcan race took pride in. Being ultra-rational, physically capable, he was an android. And he didn't have to repress any emotions because he didn't have any emotions. And this is sort of a postmodern take on it, on the modernist myth of pure rationality. And from the first episode, Commander Data is singing the song from The Wizard of Oz, the Tin Man song about the heart. And what he's missing is these emotions. And for the whole 7 seasons, he's searching for his maker's emotion chip because he wants to feel what humans feel, which is already a flaw in the design of this plot because he's already feeling this want. Right? So even just to get this, if he were a perfect computer, if he was perfect AI, he wouldn't have these desires, right? But because he's got these desires, he also discovers this lack in him, and he's wanting to fill that emptiness. He's already got psychological issues as an android, and that gets it off the ground for us to really care about this character. But it's an interesting illustration of the contrast between a modernist ideal and this newer postmodernist ideal. And there's many phases of postmodernism. This early phase, relatively early, was pointing out the importance of emotion. And there's a great book that is part of this. In the 1980s, Antonio Damasio is a really famous neuroscientist. He wrote a book called Descartes' Error. And the Cartesian error is, Descartes, as you know, I think, therefore I am, right? And he's the brain in the vat, that generation of philosophy of mind, epistemology, and so forth. And the Cartesian error is thinking that all we are is the thinking brain. And that there is this clean separation between the thinking mind and the feeling body. And that's just obviously not true. And I hope that it's obviously not true to you because I don't have the 8 weeks, at least, of a graduate level seminar to point it out to you. But if you wanted to dig deeper, you can always read Damasio's book, Descartes' Error. And this Cartesian error, this great myth that still infects unconsciously, because it's sort of in the background still, even though this is the old paradigm of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it's still infecting a lot of the ways that people think about their emotions. A lot of people, especially achiever-type men, believe that most emotions are inappropriate or show weakness of some kind. And then, of course, this links up to toxic masculinity and the toxic part of the masculinity. Hope you guys aren't getting triggered by even the term, because I know on the right, this is a triggering term. It's also a triggering term on the left, but more defensive reaction on the right. And of course, there's masculinity that's toxic. If the macho-ness, the macho bully, right, who is all about aggression and taking from others and so on. And the toxic masculinity of repressing emotions, as if emotions, except for the manly ones of anger or something along those lines, aggression, but that all the other emotions are of vulnerability, especially, just means that you're weak in some way. And that's bullshit. And if you buy into that, you're going to have a lot of repression in your life. And very likely, if you have bought into that and have not worked through it, you probably are repressed emotionally and are living out the consequences of that emotional repression in your life. Because emotions are not just to get you the project of decision, of action, of life off the ground. It starts with emotion, and it's aimed at emotion, so its beginning and ends are emotion. Plus the middle of it, if you're not enjoying the journey of your life, in other words, if you're not enjoying your life, then you're not enjoying life. And if you're putting off the enjoyment of your life for some far-off goal and hoping that that will make you happy, the joke's on you because you're not enjoying the ride. So in a way, sort of pointless, that the whole point up and down, the whole thing, a good life is one that is lived where the beginning, the middle, and the end, the emotions that dominate that life are the ones that you want to experience. And that's relative and subjective, what you want to experience. And a lot of guys are so afraid. And so I want to trigger the macho tough guys, or if there's a macho tough guyness in you, are so afraid, cowards, little scaredy little boys. They're so afraid of their emotions. They're so afraid of appearing weak that they limit which emotions are acceptable for them, but it's almost impossible to limit to just one or two emotions. It's like in some way you're going to have to selectively filter color so all you see are shades of black and white. And guess what the result is? A gray life. And a lot of guys are living with the gray life. And in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and onwards, it's really hopefully coming to the fore for them that they're missing something. And a big part of what's missing is the fact that they don't realize they're feeling the whole way. Even if you're repressing, you're still feeling. You're just not consciously aware of it. That's the bad part about it. I mean, like, if suppressing worked, right, then you could actually be a Vulcan, right? So or in other words, really, if you suppressed, you can suppress in the short term. Like, let's say you are a soldier on the front line, and you literally hear, in this instance, the soldier on the front line, enemies firing at you, and assuming you want to stay alive. Because that is, okay, so you're assuming the goal is stay alive and to help the guys around you on your side stay alive. If those are your goals, then they may not be helped by you feeling vulnerability. Totally get it. So you can suppress them up to a certain point because you are not an android. If you were an android, you'd be even better than Commander Data because you wouldn't even notice that you lack anything because you wouldn't care because you don't have emotions. But you're a Vulcan, or you're trying to be, but you can't be because actually you're human, right? So Vulcans aren't real. But if you're a Vulcan, you can suppress it. And even in the actual telling of the tale of Spock, he's actually half Vulcan, I think, or a quarter Vulcan. I think he's half. He isn't able to suppress it completely, and it comes out with emotions. He's actually feeling intense emotions under the surface, and it takes an incredible amount of willpower and discipline for him to suppress it. And after a while, you suppress it so long, it just gets repressed unconsciously. So it's like this shield or like this vault that gets shut down. But underneath, inside the vault, are all of these, what IFS therapy would call exiles, feeling all kinds of pain, as well as the potential to feel all kinds of playfulness, spontaneity, easygoingness, carefree, the sense of joy and fun and play that is lost to almost all achievers who natural default state is, or natural default approach to life is willpower and discipline. And therefore needing to repress, right, their childlike emotions, as well as all of their tender vulnerability, including love and joy and compassion, right, too, so that the level that they feel them is so minimal, so low, that hopefully you're starting to become aware of that, of the kind of emptiness and grayness and drudgery and hard work that life entails. Oh God, how exhausting it is to just be on that treadmill of life, that it never ends. You have to keep going back to work. You can't stop. You have to keep going. You got to keep going to the next thing, keep going up and up and up. And you're never enough. Life is never enough. You never have enough. And that's the nightmare trap of the achiever. Success breeds more success, but then it breeds the inability to be content with what you have, which you could have had right at the beginning. And that's part of why it's a trap. But Burden's Ass points it all out because emotions are everything. Emotions are at the beginning, and they're at the end, and they're in the middle. Now, for those who are Gen Z or younger, coddled by later postmodernism. This may be new in a different way. They're listening to old people's viewpoints because they have the opposite problem, where they're being coddled and being told that their emotions are everything in the disempowering sense. And this episode, as well as the next couple episodes, are also speaking to them because your emotions can be controlled. They can be regulated. They can be managed and handled. And you can improve in this. It involves a set of skills. So knowing that emotions are everything should be empowering and freeing in one sense, in a big way for many people in my generation, Gen X, or the generation after, the millennials, because now you know that you don't have to, that life is not well lived if you repress all of your emotions. And then for those who are just given to their emotions and are controlled by their emotions, who often feel emotional overwhelm and suck at suppression or repression, right? Because like I was pointing out with the example of the soldier, there are times when it can help you, obviously. But over the long term, we're humans. We're not robots and we're not Vulcans. So there's still emotion going on. You're just pushing it down. It's sort of like the water's boiling in the pot and you got that lid on it. And for a while, the lid is able to hold down that steam. But after a while, what happens is the steam makes the lid go, and then eventually the steam will push the lid off because it can't hold it down any further. Now, suppression long enough becomes repression, right? And then all of that bubbling under the surface is still happening. It's that you just added another lid or a thicker lid, or you've increased the weight of the lid or something like that. You've sealed it in. But it's just a powder keg waiting to blow. And when it does, when you see somebody who's been repressing a long time and he gets triggered and can't hold it back anymore, it blows up, right? And then the younger generation has the opposite problem. They're just bleeding emotions all the time and don't know how to handle, control, or regulate their own emotions. They're constantly, many of them, in emotional overwhelm, and they violate other people's boundaries by blaming them and holding them responsible for their emotions that they themselves feel. Like, you made me feel X, right? And so you hear that a lot in the college campuses and so forth. Do you struggle in your interactions with women or in your intimate relationship? Are fear, shame, or neediness sabotaging your relationships or attractiveness? In my Platinum Partnership Program, you'll discover how to transform your psychological issues, improve your success with women, and uncover your true self. Get access to all my current and future online courses by applying for the Platinum Partnership today at davidtianphd.com/platinum. Okay, so both sides of what I'm pointing out here have the same problem of a lack of emotional facility. And this episode, especially the next one as I walk you through the skills, are very important and speak to both sides on this subject of emotions. I'm just pointing out, first of all, this big myth, the Cartesian myth, this Cartesian error of thinking that we're just brains in a vat, that we are just thinking brains that happen to be encased in bodies. And you can cut off the thinking from the feeling. And instead to point out that tons of psychology, a lot of advances happening in the theory of emotions, the philosophy of emotions, the psychology of emotions. I pointed out that emotions guide behavior and decision-making from the very beginning and all the way through. And you might have heard another researcher named Jonathan Haidt. A lot of his work has been pointing this out. And there are whole teams all over academia and all the research institutes. This is well known now, of the importance of emotion for cognition. So if you want to experience on a consistent basis and within your control happiness, fulfillment, love, joy, then you're going to have to become emotionally skilled. Repression won't work. Suppression won't work in the long term. But also being constantly overwhelmed and triggered won't work either, because it's still not in your control, even though you're feeling some of these. And often if you're emotionally overwhelmed, if that sounds right to you as a descriptor for what you're feeling all the things that you don't enjoy or that you haven't learned to enjoy yet. So all of you need emotional skill. Okay, so this is supposed to be preamble for the 3 points that I wanted to make, but I guess these points here about the myth of the Cartesian error, The big why is this important? Because emotions are everything. These 2 points, that emotions guide behavior and decision making, everything begins and ends with emotions. It's emotions up and down, all of human experience. If for a human being, there is very little pure cognition that goes on. And just to even get off the ground on any of these cognitive projects, it starts with emotion. And it's always geared, the reason why we want to do something is to feel something as a result. And for all you know, all we are is feelings, because we might be a simulation. Something you probably discussed in Philosophy 101 at university, right? But no matter what it is, we know we feel. So it's sort of like, I feel, therefore I am. It's not just I think. Because when you think, you're already, just the fact that you care about something to think about. Because even when we have an AI, you got to program it to get started, right? We have goals that we've already aimed at. The aiming of the goals already are emotions. The whole thing, up and down, is emotions. All of life experience is guided by emotion. So I've got 3 super quick points here. The first one, I've kind of hinted at already, but it's that when it comes to emotions, it's common for people to think that there are good or bad emotions, and it's normal, totally normal, for people to want some emotions and not want others. But if you look at it instead as a rainbow of colors, or as a richness of notes on the musical scale, or flavors on your tongue, there aren't any bad flavors, emotions, sounds, what else? Colors per se. And it's the same with emotions. I'll give you an example. Let me just run through some common ones for you. Because emotions always tell us something important. And a big part of the therapeutic process is having the endurance to stand, to stay, and to feel the emotion long enough, the emotion that might feel at the beginning uncomfortable, to be able to stand it long enough and to stay with it long enough to find out what it can tell you. And as some examples, the feeling of shame. I've done a lot of work on shame, a lot of modules in my course, Rock Solid Relationships. There's a 5 module sequence in the course, Rock Solid Relationships, that walks you through all of the various work around toxic shame, including inner child work, grief work, and so forth. So toxic shame warns us not to try to be more or less than human. Toxic shame signals our essential limitations. It's signaling that we're, for instance, trying to be Vulcans or androids or perfect in some way. That is not human. Right? And that can be a sign. And if you're feeling that, it's important to feel into it to find its source. And only from its source can it be healed. Another example is anger. And there are many different ways in which anger can be helpful. And there are many ways in which anger can lead to destructive behavior, but they're not the same thing. Anger is not destructive behavior. They're 2 different things. And anger is often energy that gives us strength to act or to call attention to something that is important to us that maybe we've compromised our standards on, or maybe something's wrong that's going on, and that anger is a sign for that. Sadness is an energy that we discharge when we are healing, and there's beautiful sadness. And sadness is also a reminder of love, because when someone we love dies, it's good to feel sad, because if we weren't sad when they are gone, that very likely means we didn't cherish them. But in fact, beautiful sadness in this way is a sign of love. It's a part and parcel of love. And it signals deep feeling and love. And so sadness is a key emotion on the pathway to healing. And sadness is also a gateway emotion to deeper growth. Fear drives the behaviors of a lot of our protector parts. And all protectors within us are driven by fear. And until we uncover that fear, we don't really get to understand those parts of us. Fear can also be a warning of a potential danger. So there can be many important messages coming from paying attention to and staying with the emotions that are there, including fear. Guilt. Guilt is a moral shame. It's a healthy kind of shame and guards our consciences. Joy. Maybe this one's obvious, that joy is a good feeling. But it's important also to see what it's teaching us, because joy is an energy that comes when all of our needs are met. And it's also a sign that things are going well in a particular way. So they all have all these emotions, the ones that most people would think were good, but also the ones that many people think are bad and that we shouldn't have them and purposely repress because they're considered to be painful. They all have something to show us and something to tell us. And they're all part of the experience of life. And what people who are emotionally unskilled, what they consider to be emotional pain, is a very unhelpful category. So I've heard this so many times, and it's something that maybe will resonate with you, that there's pain. But it's not physical pain, though it may have physical manifestations. But the physical manifestations are different from the emotional pain, which often feels a lot more painful than anything that can happen physically, because people will actually incur physical pain like cutting in order to distract themselves from the emotional pain, the psychological pain. And I totally understand if you have rationally, and there's never any pure rationality for human beings, but let's just go with the pure rational decision here of weighing the psychological pain that is ongoing versus the potential upside of any psychological happiness, and decide on balance that the pain outweighs any potential happiness, and then decide to end your life. As a philosopher, I can understand theoretically how there might be a case such as that. For instance, if you were captured by an enemy force and you knew that they were just simply going to torture you, and if you were to confess secrets that might end up killing so many more people on your side or innocent people, it would be better to not have to undergo the pain of the torture only to give up a secret that would end up killing the people that you love. So you end your life. Now that scenario can hopefully be one that a lot of more people would just be able to see how that, they can agree with that might be a rational decision. But I also understand for those who are on the verge of something like that in their lives, though the external circumstances don't resemble the situation I've just set up, but from the inside, it feels like that for them. And I get it. I've been there. I've been there multiple times. And I get it when the pain feels overwhelming and there feels like there's no hope. And in brackets here, I always want to say there are suicide hotlines in almost every country in the world. So if before you do anything, take action on a feeling like that or a decision like that, just give them a call. It's always free, and there's someone standing by to talk to you. And of course, if you still want to hang around, because you could always kill yourself tomorrow, maybe you should give it a shot of maybe there is something that is worth sticking around for. And maybe since you're about to just end it anyway, might as well start expressing how you feel, because you got your Hail Mary shot here, and maybe find a professional to listen to you as you do this. And maybe there still is hope, because you could always do it tomorrow. Okay, just keep putting it off for one more day, one more minute, one more hour, because you can't take it back, assuming you succeed. You can't take it back. So you could always just end it. And having said all of that, because I do want to make it serious, but I don't want to make it too serious. But I do have to put that as a kind of disclaimer there for anyone who's feeling close to that. You could always do it later. So hold off on it and maybe take another breath. And consider this. So this is the point. That just like in physical fitness, there are people for whom their workouts would be considered to be pain for someone who has not developed the endurance or strength or experience and have reframed what they're experiencing as pleasurable. And you might have experienced that in some other way in your life. I know some guys who are really into math. And when they first did math as kids, they could only do math for like an hour before their brain hurt or, their head hurt. And their attention span was trashed. And then they just kept doing it. And if you just keep at it, you can actually increase your threshold of endurance on any given task so that you can take on more of it for longer periods of time. And you can actually become stronger. That's how growing happens. And it's the same with emotions. What you're experiencing for many people, that sadness or even the anger that you consider to be painful, is something that when you have more facility with and strength and endurance with your emotions, it actually gets reframed as something pleasurable. I know that might sound perverse to some of you, but that's actually what happens for people who are emotionally wise. And that's something that was an incredible thing that happened for me over the past several years, of a switch from not liking or not even knowing how to contact sadness from my deep inner child parts, not even being able to get in touch with it because it was repressed for so long and so deep beneath my consciousness that it would only come out for a few seconds at a time, and I had to catch those. And I even got a private method acting coach to help me do that, and met plenty of other different types of coaches really thinking outside the box here of traditional therapy. Until a few years later, it became a really pleasurable thing and a very cathartic experience and an empowering one of the power, the strength, the masculinity of compassion that there is there within the vulnerability. And noticing that back then in my earlier life of a kind of more repressed masculinity, afraid of weakness and thinking that vulnerability is some kind of weakness, and the fear, actually really just fear, being afraid of weakness, ironically, there's a lot more strength in embracing it. And it actually takes a tremendous amount of courage. And just to point you to the possibility that there might be a way in which, if you were to approach it differently and to increase your endurance with the things that you think are painful now, that if you look at it in a different way, it could be an immensely pleasurable thing. Not as so much, pleasure probably is the wrong word, an intensely meaningful thing that can bring joy on the other side of it and growth and healing as a result. Even in the face of tremendous tragedy, someone you love dying in a horrific way totally makes sense to me if the pain of having to live without them outweighs anything you could have in the future. And I get that. And you might be tempted to end it, especially if it was within the past year. And the statistics on widowhood show that that is likely to happen. Your chances of killing yourself go, or dying, not just killing yourself, but dying in whatever way, goes up quite a lot. But just consider that if you just hold out for another year, things might get better, or they might not. And you could always just, off yourself then. But things might get better, and maybe you should stick around to see if they could. And what I'm saying here is the science and just the common sense of it is, if emotions are skills and no emotions are good or bad in and of themselves, then what you're feeling and interpreting as pain is actually a part of you that needs compassion. And if you can meet the pain of the sadness, of the grief with compassion from your higher self, then that will be such a cathartic, powerful experience for you that it would outweigh any of the basic pleasures you had before in your life. And for those who've ever worked out or have gotten really good at something that they weren't that great at before, and they just stuck it with it, and you hit this tipping point where it became actually really pleasurable and you were looking forward to doing this activity. And for me, it was like working out at the gym. It's just basic stuff like lifting weights. The burn of even just things like dumbbell flies, at the bottom of the fly, and that kind of burning sensation in the chest. And now it just feels really good, and I miss it if I don't get to the gym. I used to hate squats too, because it would just, all the way from my head to my toes, I'd feel a kind of numb, I don't know, it's kind of redness. I don't know how to describe it. It was painful, and it sucked. It didn't feel good for the first 2-3 years. But I eventually hit a tipping point where I switched my mindset around it. And now it's a familiar feeling that I miss when I don't get it. And these are by analogy, because it's almost, I know it might even sound, what's the word? Not so much disrespectful, dismissive of your emotional pain. If I were to just suggest to you point blank that there's a way to reinterpret it so it's not painful and in fact is cathartic, but that is in fact the case. So I get where you're coming from. But for all those who are facing this emotional pain, there are no good or bad emotions in and of themselves. They are all signposts to something. And if you don't look where the signposts are pointing you to, you'll miss that lesson, and that lesson might be worth sticking around for. And I'll tell you, I'm putting it lightly, just in case any of you are there. And if you're there, I get it. But in case you're not there, obviously, it will lead to something better if you follow it long enough, because it's already better. It's just the way you're approaching it and seeing it is what is causing the suffering, right? Because it's not a physical pain that we're talking about. And the emotional and psychological pain that many people are experiencing, I know is even greater than any physical pain that they might endure, because they'd rather endure the physical pain. And that is actually one major way of suppression. A lot of achievers suppress emotions through physical pain, through physically beating up their bodies to numb themselves and get them used to the numbing. And they call it discipline. And all they get out of it in the end is, well, they get a short burst of productivity, which they then get addicted to and they need more and more. And so then the physical pain that they need in order to operate like this just gets ratcheted up and up. But what they get in the end is emotional repression and a dulling of their lives, and also an extreme exhaustion of their achiever parts. And so I've already hinted at point number 2. Actually, I've just said it already, that you can reinterpret any of these painful emotions if you have and develop the endurance, the emotional endurance for it. So I've actually got a course, a program called Emotional Mastery that has and builds on major empirically verified types of therapy like DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, ACT, obviously IFS, and the whole thing is IFS informed. And I continue to add to it. So at the moment of this recording, it is still being built into and will continue to be built into and added to over the course of months and years. There's a major set of modules on emotional endurance, and it walks you through it. And not just teaching you about the theory, but actually leading you through exercises to develop it. And other words for this type of endurance are resilience or tolerance, whatever word resonates with you. Developing that strength, emotional strength, it's something that you can actually develop just like any other strength. And the third point quickly here is there is a way. There's a way out. These are skills. You can learn them. You can improve in them. You can master them. There's a way to control your emotions. I know therapists don't like the word control when it comes to emotions. So other words that they do like are like emotional regulation, emotional skill, being able to handle your emotions, manage your emotions. I don't like any of these words because as much as skill or control, because at the end of the day, you actually are able to increase the degree and frequency of emotions that you want to feel and decrease the ones that you don't want to feel. Now, after you develop enough emotional experience, you realize that there are actually no good or bad emotions and that you're not afraid of any of them. But that's for later, and that point may not stick. So yet, until you develop that level of experience. So I just want to point out, no good or bad emotions, but even more for those who are just starting out on their journey of developing emotional skill, because it's not something that's taught in schools. You can go through your whole life. Many people go through the whole lives not even knowing that this is something that they can get better at. Your emotions, the most fundamental thing in all of human experience. But to show that, in fact, there is a way to develop these. You can improve with your emotions, your facility, your skill with your emotions, so that you can increase the intensity and frequency in which you experience the good ones that you want to feel more of, and have control over the ones you don't want to feel as often until you learn to appreciate them and that there's a place for all of them. Okay, so I also wanted just to recap, not just the 3 points of the first being there are no good or bad emotions, the second being you can develop them as endurance and strength, and the third being that these are skills that you can get better at, and the more you get better at them, the more control you have over your emotions. But I also want to remind you of the Cartesian error that we covered, as well as the bird and ass example, and that emotions are everything, up and down the entire beginning and end of human experience, and that emotions guide behavior and decision-making all the way through. I discovered these all the hard way. As I mentioned, I was a very strongly rational, cognitive type of person. Also, to my detriment, I was not a whole lot of fun at parties in my 20s. I was always debating people because I was very, in my head, very heady, very cognitive, and almost disdained emotions. And this made it obviously difficult to generate attraction because attraction is an emotion. And only later in my 30s did I learn about emotions. And I was focusing on a very limited set of emotions, mostly around attraction and desire and that sort of thing. And that was a gateway into all of these other emotions that now I realize are what comprise life. A rich life, a life well lived is a life of when you get to experience the whole range of emotions that you already are experiencing, though you may have repressed and suppressed some of them, and you may not be aware of them, or you might be afraid of a good many of them. and you might have a very one or unidimensional life, a limited life, that many achievers who rely on repression are living. You do not want that life of repression. You do not want to get to the end, especially of a long life, because then you've really wasted all of this time, only to discover that there was all this love, joy, playfulness, carefreeness, and easygoing joy in life that was available, and peace and calm that was available to you this entire time. Not only when you achieve that goal that your achiever has been working so hard for, but this entire time it was available to you, only to realize that there's so little time left. Don't let that be you. Take it seriously now, at whatever point in life you're listening to this, that emotions involve skills that you can get better at, and therefore you can get this control over it. And when you have a life like that, your relationships go so much better. I mean, if you don't have even the emotional skill, your relationships are guaranteed to not go well. On top of that, your professional life probably won't go well unless you're a pure technician. And even then, the whole thing up and down, remember, the whole reason you're in that field in the first place, hopefully, was because there was something you enjoyed about it. And enjoyment itself is an emotion. And if you spend most of your time, professional life, doing something you don't enjoy, that's a huge tragedy. And if you're not even aware of it happening, and you're just mindlessly going about living a life just to make the ends meet, when in fact, even right now, all the calm, joy, peace, happiness is available to you in yourself if you just knew and had the skills to be able to access it. So that's what this episode is about. I'm going to be covering in the next episode. Come back for the next episode because I'll be walking you through some of the most important emotional skills. And if you like this episode, please share it with anyone you think would benefit from it. If you like this podcast, please give it a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. That always helps. And let me know what you think about it in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for your support and for listening. I look forward to welcoming you to the next episode. David Tian, signing out.